Alex had always been passionate about words. Ever since he was a teenager, he loved writing, whether it was a short story, a blog post, or even a simple social media update. Words, for him, were not just letters put together, they were a way to connect with people, to share ideas, and to make someone feel something. As he grew older, he decided to turn this passion into a career. He became a content writer, creating articles, videos, and online posts for different clients and platforms. He enjoyed it, but there was a problem. No matter how hard he tried, his work seemed to get lost in the crowd. Every day, Alex would sit at his desk with a cup of coffee, staring at his computer screen. He had all the ideas in the world, but somehow, the titles he came up with never grabbed attention. He knew that a great title could make or break a piece of content. One word could be the difference between someone clicking on his article or scrolling past it. He had read countless guides on creating catchy titles and optimizing content for the internet, but nothing seemed to work. It frustrated him. He knew his content was good, but the audience just wasn't noticing it. Alex's apartment was small but cozy. Books were stacked on the shelves, sticky notes covered the walls, and his laptop always had dozens of tabs open. Despite the clutter, this was where he felt most alive. Writing was his world. But recently, even this safe space started to feel stressful. Every morning, he would wake up hoping that today would be the day his content finally got the attention it deserved. Yet, by the evening, he often felt disappointed and exhausted. He wanted to find a simple, practical way to improve without completely changing his style or voice. One rainy afternoon, Alex leaned back in his chair and thought about his journey. He remembered the excitement of his first published article, the thrill of seeing someone comment positively on his work, and the tiny victories that had kept him going. But he also remembered the countless times his content went unnoticed, the moments when he wondered if he was just wasting his time. He realized that the problem wasn't the quality of his writing, it was the titles. Titles were the first thing people saw, and if the title didn't catch their attention, the rest of the content might as well not exist. He began to study the way popular creators wrote their titles. He noticed patterns. Certain words seemed to appear again and again, words that triggered curiosity or emotion. But simply copying these ideas didn't feel right. Alex wanted something authentic, something that felt like him. He wanted a strategy that could be applied to his existing work without making it feel forced or unnatural. He wanted a solution that was clever, simple, and effective. During one of his late-night research sessions, Alex started experimenting. He would take one of his old titles and play with it. He would read it aloud, imagine someone scrolling past it on a phone, and ask himself, would I click on this? Sometimes, he would change a word here or there, test a few alternatives, and see if it sounded better. These small exercises became exciting for him. They gave him a sense of control and hope. Maybe the secret wasn't about writing completely new titles, but about understanding the power of words, even a single word, and how it could change the way people reacted. At the same time, Alex noticed something else. He wasn't the only one struggling. On forums and groups, other writers and content creators shared similar frustrations. They talked about great content going unnoticed and the struggle of catching the audience's attention. Reading these stories made Alex feel less alone. It also motivated him to find a solution, not just for himself, but for anyone who might be facing the same challenge. By the end of that week, Alex had a new mindset. Instead of getting overwhelmed by the vast world of content creation, he decided to focus on what he could control. He would focus on one thing at a time, the titles. He believed that if he could master the art of creating engaging titles without losing his authentic voice, he could reach more people, get more engagement, and finally see the results of his hard work. This simple idea became the foundation of his journey. In that moment, Alex didn't know exactly what the solution would look like. He didn't know which words would make the biggest difference or how quickly he would see results. But he felt a spark of curiosity and excitement, a sense that he was about to discover something small yet powerful that could change everything. He felt ready to experiment, ready to learn, and ready to see how even a tiny change could create a huge impact. And that was where his story began, sitting at his small desk, with a cup of coffee, a head full of ideas, and the determination to make one simple adjustment that could transform his work forever. Even though Alex had discovered a small spark of hope in his quest to improve titles, the challenges he faced were far from over. The world of online content was massive, with millions of articles, videos, and posts being uploaded every single day. No matter how original or valuable his content was, it often felt like shouting into an endless void. Some days, he would see his carefully crafted posts disappear into obscurity, barely a click or a view to show for his effort. It was disheartening, and yet, he refused to give up. Alex knew he had to face a harsh reality: creating high-quality content alone was not enough. People didn't scroll endlessly through pages just because an article was informative or a video was well made. The first impression mattered more than anything else: the title. It was the hook, the one chance to grab someone's attention before they moved on. And this was exactly where Alex struggled. He had always been meticulous about his writing, but titles seemed deceptively simple. How could one phrase make such a huge difference? He began analyzing his previous work with an almost scientific eye. He would list every article he had written over the past year, noting the number of views, likes, and shares. Patterns emerged, and the results were clear: titles that included emotionally charged words, curiosity triggers, or actionable terms performed slightly better, while generic, safe titles often flopped. But Alex didn't want to just follow trends. He wanted something smarter, a subtle technique that could be applied without losing the authenticity of his writing. The pressure started to build. Every project he took on now came with a mental checklist. He would write the article, revise it, polish the language, and then spend hours agonizing over the title. The irony wasn't lost on him: he spent more time on titles than on the content itself. On some days, he felt like he was trapped in a loop, producing great work that no one noticed, experimenting with titles that sometimes worked and often didn't, and always chasing that elusive formula for engagement. One evening, Alex received feedback from a client on a blog post he had poured his heart into. The client was pleased with the content itself but said the title didn't stand out enough to attract readers. Alex felt a mixture of frustration and determination. He realized this was not just his problem, it was a universal challenge for content creators everywhere. But that didn't make it any less personal. He knew he had to solve it, not only for his clients but for himself, for his sense of purpose. He decided to take a step back and observe the broader online landscape. He spent hours on social media, news websites, and video platforms, paying attention to titles that seemed to go viral. Some were dramatic, some playful, some mysterious, but they all had one thing in common: a small element that made them irresistible to click. Sometimes it was a single word that stood out, a word that created curiosity or urgency. Other times, it was the way the words flowed together, like a melody that made the audience pause for a moment. Alex started to experiment in small ways. He would take one of his underperforming titles and rewrite it multiple times, changing a word here, a phrase there, testing which combination sounded the most appealing. Some attempts were disasters, making the title sound awkward or forced. Others showed tiny improvements. It was a painstaking process, but it was teaching him something invaluable: even the smallest change could make a difference in how people perceived his work. Yet, despite these small victories, the challenge remained enormous. The internet was crowded, and attention spans were shorter than ever. There was no magic formula that guaranteed success. Every day brought new algorithms, new trends, and new competitors. Alex often felt like he was running a marathon where the finish line kept moving farther away. But he also felt that thrill, the thrill of solving a puzzle, of finding that one small adjustment that could turn obscurity into recognition. This constant tension between frustration and curiosity became the fuel for Alex's journey. He understood that the challenge was not just about writing good titles, it was about understanding human behavior, psychology, and the subtle power of words. He realized that mastery would not come overnight, but every small experiment, every tiny adjustment, brought him one step closer to his goal. It was a challenge he didn't just have to face, it was one he wanted to overcome. In the quiet moments, Alex would sit back and imagine the possibilities. What if he discovered a method so simple yet so powerful that it could transform the way his content was seen? What if the solution was hiding in plain sight, waiting for him to notice it? These thoughts kept him awake at night, excited rather than anxious. The challenge was real, but so was the opportunity. And with that mindset, Alex prepared himself for the next step in his journey, ready to dive deeper into experimentation and discovery. After weeks of experimentation, frustration, and small victories, Alex felt like he was on the edge of a breakthrough. One evening, as the rain tapped gently against his apartment window, he leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his old articles and video titles. He had tried countless changes, reordering words, adding adjectives, creating curiosity hooks, but nothing had felt consistent. Some titles would perform well by chance, while others, equally polished, barely got noticed. He realized that he was looking for a solution too complicated, when perhaps the answer was deceptively simple. As he stared at one of his underperforming titles, he began to play with words in his mind. He would whisper them aloud, testing the sound, the rhythm, the feel. Then, almost by accident, he replaced a single word in the title with a synonym, a word that carried a slightly different energy. It wasn't dramatic, the structure of the title remained intact. Yet, when he read it aloud, it sounded different. Fresh. Alive. There was a subtle spark that wasn't there before, a small tweak that made the phrase more intriguing without changing its meaning. Alex's heart raced. Could it really be this simple? Could one small change, a single word, make such a difference? He quickly made a few more adjustments across several titles, each time replacing only one key term with a synonym. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Titles that had previously felt flat now carried a sense of curiosity, urgency, or relatability. They felt clickable, almost magnetic. Alex realized that he had stumbled upon a hidden principle: sometimes, the tiniest shift in language could produce the largest impact. Excited, he decided to take it further. He opened a spreadsheet and began cataloging his experiments. For each article or video, he noted the original title, the replaced word, and the synonym he had used. Then he tracked engagement metrics, clicks, shares, and comments. Patterns became clearer with each passing day. Words that conveyed action, emotion, or mystery consistently outperformed neutral, generic terms. He discovered that readers responded not only to meaning but to energy, rhythm, and subtle nuance. One carefully chosen word could completely change a reader's perception, and Alex was fascinated by the science and art behind it. It wasn't just about finding flashy words or trendy phrases. Alex realized that relevance mattered too. A synonym could feel stronger or more captivating, but if it didn't fit the context, it could confuse or even alienate the audience. The challenge was to identify the single word that enhanced curiosity, clarity, or emotional pull while keeping the core meaning intact. That balance, he discovered, was the true power of his discovery. It wasn't about changing everything, it was about changing just enough to make people pause, notice, and engage. As Alex continued to experiment, he began to see results more clearly. Titles he had once thought were unremarkable started to attract attention, sometimes dramatically so. Articles that had languished at the bottom of search results were finally being clicked. Social media posts that previously went unnoticed were now shared and discussed. Alex felt a thrill he hadn't experienced in months, the thrill of seeing the tangible results of his small but deliberate efforts. It was validation that his method worked, and it gave him a surge of confidence. But it wasn't only the results that excited him, it was the discovery itself. The realization that tiny changes could have such an outsized impact changed the way Alex approached writing altogether. He began to apply the principle beyond titles, experimenting with phrasing in introductions, social media snippets, and even email subject lines. Each time, the results reminded him that writing was a delicate balance of clarity, creativity, and psychological insight. One small shift in language could unlock engagement that had previously seemed impossible. Alex also began sharing his findings with a few trusted friends in the content creation world. Their reactions were enthusiastic, and they started experimenting with the method themselves. Seeing others succeed using the same approach reinforced Alex's confidence. He realized that this wasn't a personal trick, it was a universal principle that could help anyone struggling to get noticed online. It was simple, elegant, and surprisingly effective, a small key that could open a big door. That night, as he closed his laptop and stared out at the city lights, Alex felt a sense of satisfaction and excitement. He had discovered something valuable, something that could transform his content and his career. The solution wasn't flashy, expensive, or complicated, it was subtle, almost invisible, yet profoundly powerful. All it required was attention, experimentation, and the courage to try small changes. And with that realization, Alex felt ready for the next phase of his journey, knowing that the key to success often lies in the smallest of details. Alex woke up early the next morning, energized by the discovery he had made the night before. The idea that a single word could change everything felt almost magical, and he was eager to test it in the real world. He brewed a strong cup of coffee, opened his laptop, and scrolled through his backlog of articles and videos. He needed a starting point, a piece of content that had been good but hadn't performed as well as he hoped. One title in particular stood out. It was solid, clear, and informative, but it lacked that extra spark, that subtle magnetism that made people want to click immediately. He stared at the title for a long time, whispering the words aloud, imagining how it would look on a search page or social media feed. Then, with deliberate care, he replaced a single term with a synonym. The change was minor, almost imperceptible to someone reading quickly, but to Alex, it felt like a small spark of life had been injected into the phrase. The rhythm felt smoother, the curiosity factor slightly higher, and the emotional pull just a bit stronger. It was subtle, but he sensed the difference instantly. Feeling both nervous and excited, Alex uploaded the article and scheduled it to go live. He knew this was the moment of truth. Would this tiny change really make a difference, or was it just his imagination? He didn't have to wait long to find out. Within hours, he began to notice a difference. The article started receiving more clicks than similar posts had in the past, and by the next day, the increase was even clearer. Readers were engaging, commenting, and sharing. Alex's heart raced. This wasn't luck, this was the result of a thoughtful, deliberate adjustment, a small tweak that amplified the appeal of his work. Encouraged by this early success, Alex decided to experiment further. He picked 2 more titles, each from different types of content, one a technical blog post, the other a casual lifestyle article. He applied the same principle, carefully replacing a single word in each title with a synonym that added energy, clarity, or emotional appeal. Then he monitored the results. Once again, the change made a noticeable difference. The posts received higher engagement than similar content he had posted before, confirming his hypothesis. What fascinated Alex most wasn't just the numbers, it was the way readers responded to the subtle difference. People didn't know why they were drawn to the article, only that the title made them pause, intrigued enough to click. Alex realized that writing was part art, part psychology. A single word could alter perception, influence curiosity, and trigger action. He was no longer simply writing titles, he was carefully crafting invitations, small doors that led readers into his content. By the end of the week, Alex had tested a dozen articles using the new approach. Each experiment provided insights. Some words were more effective than others, some synonyms sounded clever but didn't resonate with readers. He learned to trust his instincts, combining creativity with observation. He even started keeping notes on why certain words worked better in specific contexts. Over time, he began to see patterns and rules emerge, creating a method he could apply systematically rather than relying on guesswork. This first real success filled Alex with a sense of empowerment. For months, he had felt frustrated, lost, and invisible in the vast online world. But now, he understood that he wasn't powerless. He could influence how people perceived his content, and the method was simple, repeatable, and highly effective. The experiment had shown him that the smallest, most deliberate change, a single carefully chosen word, could produce disproportionately large results. By the weekend, Alex was so energized that he started teaching the technique to himself more formally. He created a small checklist for title testing: identify the keyword, find a synonym that enhanced curiosity or emotion, preserve the original meaning, and test the change. This structured approach made the process feel manageable and exciting. He wasn't overwhelmed by the endless possibilities anymore. He had a clear starting point and a system to follow. That night, as Alex closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, he reflected on the week's journey. The first experiment had been a small step, but it was a transformative one. It confirmed something he had long suspected: small, thoughtful changes often carried more power than sweeping, dramatic adjustments. The challenge that had once felt daunting now seemed like an exciting puzzle to solve, a series of small victories waiting to be unlocked. Alex went to sleep that night with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. The world of content creation, with all its noise and competition, was still vast and unpredictable, but now, he had a tool, a secret weapon, and a renewed confidence that even the smallest changes could lead to significant, meaningful results. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time, Alex felt certain that he was on the right path. After the success of his first experiments, Alex felt a quiet sense of triumph, but it was more than that. It was the beginning of a deeper understanding. Sitting at his desk one afternoon, he reflected on the week's results. The articles that had languished in obscurity now attracted attention, the videos he had uploaded gained unexpected traction, and even his social media posts seemed to resonate differently. The key, he realized, wasn't just luck or timing, it was the deliberate, subtle changes he had made. One word could make all the difference. As Alex stared at his notes, he began connecting dots he hadn't noticed before. Titles that had worked well shared something in common: they had a single word that captured curiosity, emotion, or urgency. It wasn't about flashy adjectives or over-the-top phrasing. It was precise, almost surgical. He understood now that words weren't just communication tools, they were psychological triggers. A carefully chosen term could nudge a reader to pause, to think, and most importantly, to click. This realization transformed the way Alex approached his work. Before, he had been chasing trends, trying to copy what seemed popular, or overcomplicating his titles in hopes of standing out. Now, he saw that success didn't require grand gestures. It required awareness, attention to detail, and a subtle understanding of human behavior. Each title, each sentence, and even each word had a potential impact, and mastering that small scale could produce results far beyond what he had imagined. The more he thought about it, the more profound the implications became. If a single word could change engagement, what did that mean for other aspects of content creation? Could the same principle apply to introductions, to social media captions, or even to calls to action in his articles? Alex's mind raced with possibilities. The strategy he had stumbled upon wasn't just a trick for titles, it was a philosophy for communication itself. Every phrase, every term, every nuance mattered. Excited, he decided to test this idea further. He went back to his older content and applied the same principle systematically. Carefully, he replaced one key term in each title with a synonym that enhanced curiosity, urgency, or emotional connection. Then he tracked the results over several days. Once again, the effect was undeniable. Articles that had previously gone unnoticed began drawing clicks and shares. Even content he had written months ago felt revitalized. Alex realized he had unlocked a repeatable process, a method that wasn't based on guesswork but on observation, experimentation, and understanding of subtle psychological cues. The realization also gave Alex a new perspective on the way content creators approached their work. Many struggled with engagement because they overlooked the small but crucial details. They focused on quantity over quality or overlooked the emotional and cognitive impact of their words. Alex saw clearly that by paying attention to these tiny levers, the single words that could change perception, he could outperform content that was otherwise equally good or even better. It was a secret advantage, one that was simple but incredibly powerful. This insight transformed his confidence. Before, he had felt like a small fish in an enormous, competitive ocean, invisible despite his efforts. Now, he understood that mastery didn't always come from being louder or bigger, it often came from being smarter, more attentive, and more deliberate. Small, precise actions could yield outsized results, and he finally felt in control of his success. More than anything, Alex realized the importance of patience and observation. Results didn't appear instantly. Each experiment required careful thought, testing, and refinement. But the process itself became exciting, even addictive. He loved observing patterns, noting subtle differences, and adjusting his approach. Every experiment, even the ones that failed, provided valuable insight. He felt like a scientist exploring a fascinating, intricate ecosystem of human behavior and attention. By the end of that week, Alex sat back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. The journey had started with frustration, confusion, and endless trial and error. But now, he had discovered something far more meaningful than just better engagement. He had discovered the power of subtlety, precision, and observation. The realization hit him fully: success wasn't always about grand gestures, it was about noticing the small levers, the tiny pivots that could create enormous impact. One word, carefully chosen, could change everything. For Alex, this wasn't just a technique anymore, it was a revelation. And as he looked ahead, he knew the journey was far from over. There were more experiments to conduct, more titles to refine, and more content to elevate. But armed with this understanding, he felt unstoppable, ready to apply this knowledge not just to his work, but to every word he would write in the future. After weeks of discovery and experimentation, Alex felt both excitement and a sense of responsibility. He knew he had stumbled upon a powerful method, but the real challenge lay in refinement. Understanding the principle was one thing, mastering it was another. He realized that success wouldn't come from random tweaks or occasional luck, it required consistent, thoughtful application. And so, Alex began the next phase of his journey, refining his approach to titles with precision and intention. He started by reviewing every article and video he had created over the past year. Each title was dissected, examined, and tested in his mind. He asked himself detailed questions: which word drives curiosity? Which term feels weak or generic? Which phrase creates urgency or emotional connection? Slowly, a system began to form. Alex would identify the most important word in a title, the one that carried the essence of the content, and then search for synonyms that could elevate its impact. Some were subtle changes, almost invisible to a casual reader, but they made the title feel fresher, sharper, more compelling. To organize his experiments, Alex created a small spreadsheet. It became his laboratory of words. Each row represented a title, the original keyword, the synonyms he tested, and the resulting engagement metrics. Over time, patterns emerged. Certain types of words consistently performed better than others. Words that suggested action, promise, curiosity, or emotion attracted more clicks. Words that were vague or neutral tended to underperform. This data gave Alex confidence, allowing him to make deliberate choices instead of relying solely on intuition. But refinement wasn't just about replacing words, it was also about understanding context. A synonym might sound exciting in one title but fall flat in another. Alex learned to consider the tone, the audience, and the platform. A playful word worked well for lifestyle articles, while a precise, professional term was better for technical posts. He even experimented with the rhythm of titles, testing how certain words sounded aloud, imagining a reader scrolling quickly through search results or social media feeds. Every subtle adjustment was a step toward mastery. Alex also began testing combinations. Sometimes, replacing a single word wasn't enough, he would tweak two words strategically, always keeping the overall meaning intact. The goal was never to overcomplicate the title, but to enhance its magnetic pull without losing authenticity. Through trial, observation, and careful analysis, he discovered that small, intentional refinements often had a larger impact than dramatic overhauls. During this phase, Alex's confidence grew, but so did his humility. He realized that the digital landscape was constantly changing, and what worked today might not work tomorrow. He needed to keep experimenting, observing, and adjusting. Refinement, he understood, wasn't a one-time task, it was an ongoing process. Each piece of content, each title, each audience interaction provided data and insight. Mastery came from persistence, patience, and a willingness to learn continuously. What fascinated Alex most was the ripple effect of these refinements. Titles that had once struggled now drew attention, and as a result, the content itself reached a wider audience. His articles were shared more often, commented on more frequently, and engaged with on social media at levels he had never experienced before. This success reinforced a vital lesson: small changes, when applied thoughtfully and consistently, could transform outcomes in ways that felt almost magical. Alex's process became almost ritualistic. Each morning, he would review new content ideas, craft tentative titles, and refine them carefully, testing word choices and phrasing until each title felt just right. Each afternoon, he would track engagement from previous experiments, noting patterns and refining his approach further. This cycle of creation, observation, and adjustment became both his discipline and his joy. By the end of this refinement phase, Alex had achieved more than just better engagement. He had achieved clarity, understanding, and a repeatable method. He had learned to see content through the eyes of his audience, to understand what would spark curiosity and compel action. The journey that began with frustration and uncertainty had transformed into mastery and insight. Sitting back one evening, Alex reflected on how far he had come. The small change that had seemed almost trivial at first, a single word replacement, had opened the door to a world of discovery, experimentation, and improvement. Refinement had taught him patience, attention to detail, and the immense power of subtlety. And most importantly, it had shown him that mastery often lies not in grand gestures, but in careful, deliberate, and thoughtful action. Months of experimentation, observation, and careful refinement had finally brought Alex to a pivotal moment. The countless hours spent analyzing titles, testing synonyms, and adjusting phrasing were paying off in ways he had only imagined in his dreams. His content, once overlooked, was now drawing significant attention. Articles that had languished in obscurity were climbing search rankings. Videos he had uploaded were gaining traction. Social media posts that had once gone unnoticed were now being shared widely. Alex could feel the ripple effect of his hard work, and it was exhilarating. The real success, however, wasn't measured purely in numbers. It was in the way people engaged with his work. Readers were leaving thoughtful comments, asking questions, and even referencing his content in discussions across forums and platforms. People were not just noticing his work, they were interacting with it. It was a validation that the subtle, deliberate changes he had made were resonating with his audience. One carefully chosen word in a title had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of how language could capture attention, spark curiosity, and build connection. Alex began to see his efforts as a series of dominoes, each small tweak leading to a cascade of impact. A single synonym replacement could influence not only the click rate but also the overall engagement with the content. One adjusted title might lead to more shares, which in turn brought more traffic, comments, and interaction. The momentum built slowly at first, but soon, it became self-sustaining. He had found a method that worked consistently, and it was both simple and powerful. With success came recognition. Colleagues and fellow content creators began noticing the quality and impact of Alex's work. Some reached out for advice, curious about how he had transformed his engagement metrics. Alex shared his method openly, explaining the importance of attention to detail, subtle word choices, and experimentation. He realized that his journey was not just personal, it could serve as a roadmap for others struggling to gain visibility in a crowded digital landscape. The thought that his discoveries could help others fueled him even more. This success also changed the way Alex approached new projects. He no longer wrote titles and hoped for the best. Every new article, video, or social media post began with a deliberate focus on the title. He brainstormed multiple synonyms for key words, tested variations, and carefully imagined how each option would resonate with his audience. This process had become both methodical and creative, blending data-driven insights with instinct and storytelling flair. Every small adjustment now carried weight, and Alex felt empowered by the precision of his craft. Interestingly, Alex noticed that his audience's engagement went beyond initial clicks. Readers and viewers seemed more invested in the content itself. By drawing them in with a subtle, intriguing title, he had effectively built a bridge between curiosity and attention. Once people entered his content, they stayed longer, read more carefully, and shared more willingly. The impact of his small word changes had multiplied, influencing the entire experience of his audience. It was a lesson in how thoughtful adjustments could lead to exponential outcomes. Financially, the results were tangible as well. His content attracted more views, which translated into higher ad revenue and more freelance opportunities. Companies wanted to collaborate, recognizing that Alex's work consistently reached and engaged audiences. Yet, despite the growing success, he remained grounded. He understood that the principles he had discovered were not about chasing trends or shortcuts, they were about attention, subtlety, and understanding human behavior. Success, he realized, was the natural outcome of careful, deliberate, and consistent effort. By the end of the year, Alex's transformation was undeniable. From a frustrated, overlooked content creator, he had become someone recognized for both skill and insight. The small experiments he had started with, replacing a single word in a title, had grown into a full-fledged strategy that consistently produced results. More importantly, he had learned that mastery was a combination of observation, experimentation, and refinement. Success wasn't about grand gestures or luck, it was about noticing the small levers that could move the biggest outcomes. Sitting at his desk one quiet evening, Alex reflected on his journey. The countless hours, the trials, the failures, and the experiments had all led to this moment. Success had finally arrived, not as a sudden stroke of luck, but as the product of patience, perseverance, and careful attention to detail. And in that reflection, Alex felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had not only improved his own work but had discovered a universal truth: sometimes, the smallest, most deliberate changes can create the greatest impact. Alex sat in his small apartment, the evening city lights casting a soft glow across his desk. The journey he had been on over the past months felt almost surreal when he thought back to where it had all started. What had begun as frustration and confusion, wondering why his content never reached the audience it deserved, had evolved into mastery, understanding, and tangible success. The lessons he had learned were clear now, etched into his mind through trial, error, and careful observation. Sometimes, the smallest changes carried the greatest impact. Reflecting on his journey, Alex realized that the principle he had discovered, replacing a single word with a synonym while keeping the rest of the title intact, was deceptively simple, yet profoundly powerful. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't a shortcut. It was the result of attention to detail, an understanding of human curiosity, and the willingness to experiment. Every title, every piece of content, and every audience interaction became an opportunity to learn, adjust, and refine. He had learned to look beyond the obvious, to see the hidden levers that influenced engagement and attention. Alex also recognized the broader lesson that applied far beyond content creation. Life, he thought, often works in similar ways. Small, thoughtful adjustments, whether in communication, relationships, or work, could create significant outcomes over time. He had spent months obsessing over minor details, but it was precisely that focus that had led to transformation. Change didn't have to be overwhelming or dramatic, it just had to be deliberate and consistent. Even a tiny, carefully chosen action could have ripple effects far beyond what one might expect. As he reflected, Alex felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the frustrations and failures that had driven him to look closer, experiment harder, and think differently. Without those challenges, he might never have discovered the power of small changes. Each mistake had been a stepping stone, each failed title an experiment that brought him closer to understanding. Success, he realized, wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about learning from it, observing the results, and adjusting intelligently. He also thought about the people who had followed his work, commented on his content, and engaged with him online. Their interactions reinforced the importance of connection, curiosity, and subtle influence. A single word could invite someone into a story, spark their imagination, or make them feel seen. Language, Alex understood, was a bridge between creator and audience. The journey had taught him not just about content optimization, but about empathy and communication, about how to craft experiences that truly resonated. With these reflections came a sense of responsibility. Alex wanted to share his insights with others who struggled as he once had. He knew that countless writers, creators, and marketers felt overwhelmed by the crowded digital space, frustrated that quality alone wasn't enough. To them, he would say, pay attention to the small levers. Experiment with tiny, deliberate changes. Observe carefully. Replace a single word if it elevates curiosity or emotional pull, but always preserve authenticity. It wasn't about manipulation, it was about understanding and serving the audience better. In the quiet of his apartment, Alex began jotting down advice for anyone embarking on a similar journey. He encouraged patience, noting that results might be gradual but cumulative. He emphasized observation, learning from both successes and failures. He highlighted the power of subtlety, the idea that mastery often lies in the smallest details. And he reminded others that creativity and structure could coexist. Experimentation didn't have to be chaotic, it could be systematic, intelligent, and deliberate. As he looked around his workspace, now filled with notes, spreadsheets, and reminders of his journey, Alex felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had transformed frustration into understanding, confusion into method, and small experiments into tangible success. He realized that the journey itself had been as valuable as the results. Each step had taught him patience, discipline, and the power of incremental improvement. Finally, Alex leaned back and smiled. The road ahead was still full of possibilities, more content to create, more words to refine, more connections to build, but he was ready. He knew that the lessons he had learned could guide him through any challenge. Attention to detail, careful observation, and deliberate action could turn even the smallest change into a meaningful result. And as he closed his laptop and looked out at the city, he felt a quiet confidence that, with focus, creativity, and persistence, there was no limit to what he could achieve.
As you can see here, the derivative at this point confirms the function's behavior.
I see, but what about the limits as x approaches infinity?